Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the War Report. Now, we are most pleased to announce we have returned to our home of Caucasian Albania because Trump ended the 30 to 50 year long war with Azerbaijan. We're very happy to be there, and also the war between Armenia and Cambodia is also over, and
Thank God.
we are just living through a real golden age. Okay, so we are
Yeah.
back in the
Give
Caucasian
the man a
mountains.
Nobel.
Thank you. Back in the Caucasian mountains, the homeland of all of our peoples. I assume if you're listening to this, you are of a certain persuasion here. Uh, I mean, look, no disrespect to the Uralic peoples, but I'm just going to say only Hungarians are allowed among them. But I digress.
Yeah.
I think there might be a Finn or two left in the audience, in which case I
We haven't offended them already.
no, yeah, it's funny when I look at the demographics of this. I don't want to get on too much of a tangent here. The national cross section of our audience,
Uh-huh.
it's funny because it's always like 30 to 50% Anglosphere between like the U.S., UK, and Canada, which is to be expected. We're English language
Yeah.
mostly, but then I don't know. It becomes like a grab bag of European countries that really compete for for the top slot there. I noticed that like we were doing well in Germany for a while, but then we probably got banned in Germany, so it's kind of dropped
Yeah, it
off
could
there.
be.
Random Eastern European countries will just like start taking the lead. Like I'll see Serbia and Bulgaria up there. Occasionally, like some stuff out of Iberia, but uh, a, a very diverse audience, if I do say so myself, because diversity is our strength. Say it with me. Diversity
The city
is
is
our
their
strength.
strength.
Thank you. Um, and without further ado, because I feel like I filibustered long enough, we have plenty of frontline news to
Yeah.
cover to show you that Ukraine is winning and all they need is just some tomahawks.
Yeah. Yeah. Just listen to Trump. So, frontline news. We're going to begin with a front that has been very active, but no reports from today. And that's the Pokrovsk front. Since our last show, you can see with the yellow outlines that the Ukrainians have been quite successful in almost cutting off this salient right at the bottom. And for several days, this is from Sunday, we're recording on Monday, the 29th of September. Um, it looked like maybe the Russians were going to get cut off. And, 2, 3, 4 days go by, and that hasn't happened. And then the news that I got yesterday was the Russians slightly expanded this area of the salient at the bottom left side. So the important thing to remember is this salient is on the other side of a river, most of it, right? And the part that is underneath the yellow. So losing this salient is actually really important because you would need to build this area up in order not to have to cross the river yet again, right? And when rainy season starts to hit and it's just a couple of weeks away in Ukraine, this could prove to be quite a bit difficult for the Russians to have to retransverse. So there's the overall map of the Pokrovsk Mirnograd area. And now we're going to zoom in to the area that the Russians have retaken. So you can see that the Russians expanded and took over, I believe, a village by the name of Dorozhinie. And there's another one that's half captured, and Volkivka is the other village that was captured, along with some fortifications. Now, I am talking about the area that they took, not the area that's still static. So if you look at the yellow outlines, there's two regions that are outlined in yellow. Those are the regions that the Ukrainians took back from them from a counterstrike about a week ago, maybe 5, 6 days ago. And what you see on the left side, the left salient of the Ukrainians, is they retook areas of anti-tank ditches. Those are those straight lines that you see running up north and south. But there is only one way into this salient. And so the Ukrainians here only have one way of coming in and out. There's no road, there are only tree lines. if the Russians are able to squeeze this area, that gives them the stability that they need. Now, I remember that even in the Western press, there were articles being written about hundreds, if not thousands, of Russian troops being stuck in this northern salient. And what we're doing is looking at the base of it, the bottom, the southern part of that northern salient. Um, and to truth be told, I thought, that might be a possibility. Zelensky has been saying for at least a week now that there is going to be a new Ukrainian offensive. And, it's wild to think that, because where would it be? Would they try to invade Kursk again? They would have to go through those small patches that the Russians have captured in the Sumy region. Would it go around Vovchansk? Would it go somewhere else around Belgorod, or east of Belgorod? It's hard to say. And the Kherson region, they have the same problem the Russians have, and that is that they would have to have major river crossings. I don't know how much water is left in the Dnieper right now, but they nonetheless would have to cross. It would be at the lowest point. The banks of each side of that river are elevated, so it would be a difficult traversing that they would have to do, even if there was a minimal amount of water. So where would it be? And my suspicion is they would try to stop what's happening in Pokrovsk. So what we saw with the Ukrainian counterattack, uh, the remnants of it, what's left of it, are these yellow outlines. There is a potential. You can see that the Russians themselves have only one way in and out from the southern to the northern part of the salient. So we'll just have to see how that goes. Uh, the next slide, we can see that the Russians have captured another area well south of that salient, which is directly east of Mirnograd. Now, I believe, if I'm not wrong, this area of Mirnograd, the Russians have been there before, but I don't see any outlines of that. I could be mistaken, but in any case, you can see that the major fortifications um, guarding Mirnograd from the east, there are basically two, and the Russians have captured the first bunch, which are sort of shaped hourglass. By the way, the hourglass shaped trenches are there to repel attacks from every direction. Then we have anti-tank ditches. And then after that, another ditch, and then that's it. That's the city of Mirnograd, which is the twin city of Pokrovsk. As you can see in the map, that they're almost really one town. There's just a little bit of, let's say, a rural area stretching of 5 kilometers maybe between them. So this is an area that, and you can see in the Pokrovsk region, the Russians have also been making advances within the city. The Russians are present within the city and have been there for several weeks. But you can see that if the Russians are having a really, really difficult time keeping that salient, then they would have lost it by now, excluding, of course, the statements made by Zelensky that there is going to be an offensive coming up very shortly. So
And that's assuming
it,
anything amounts from that, because it could just be him blowing hot air. But I
it
imagine
could be.
if he's coming out and saying that there's going to be some attempt at an offensive, and Pokrovsk being the real last linchpin before Slovyansk and Kramatorsk, it makes sense that they're
Yeah.
going to throw anything at the wall, see what sticks, which I'm not saying is going to be enough to, say, halt the Russian advance, by no means. But it can turn this into a meat grinder, really, for both sides. Now, I think it would
Yeah.
be substantially worse for the Ukrainian side than the Russian, just for a number of factors. But this can, uh, I mean, this can really rack up the casualties, which is,
Hmm.
in this war, is not something that you want to see, especially from the Ukrainian side, with how many casualties have already been sustained. and I don't know the kind of manpower the Ukrainians would think they would need in order to enforce this, but I would only assume that the drive for conscription all across Ukraine would get worse because, I mean, every day you see a story that's worse about uh, the TCC actions and uh, how much they scrape the bottom of the barrel. So,
Right, and Russians are beginning to target, and they have been for months, targeting TCC centers.
it's been the greatest hearts and minds victory that they've had this entire war, is when they just
That's a great
blow
way.
these
Yeah,
places up. Uh,
absolutely.
it's it's almost funny. I don't want to say it is funny because the nature of the circumstances,
Yeah.
but it is almost funny when you go on Ukrainian language websites or just websites like Facebook, Twitter, like just social media sites, and search Ukrainian terms about the TCC around the times when the strikes were really picking up. That's the most pro-Russian sentiment I've seen on Ukraine since before the Maidan.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
and I'm not exaggerating. It is
Yeah,
insane.
and I'll tell you something anecdotally. So, like at my church, there are several Ukrainians who are fluent Russian speakers, and they are here. One of them I know is from Western Ukraine. One of them is from Kiev. I don't see him all the time. And these people are pro-Ukraine. There's some I don't even talk to. They're usually, I think sometimes I see them for the English liturgy. Sometimes they're there for the Slavic, like the old Slavic liturgy. And um, these people are still pro-Ukraine, but they don't want to get drafted. They're young. They would definitely be drafted. They're in their mid-20s or early 20s. And they speak absolutely fluent Russian. I've almost never heard them speak Ukrainian. When I speak my gobbledygook Mejislovinsky, that's my accent. They think I'm Ukrainian, or they think I'm Ukrainian or Polish, even when I'm saying Russian words.
Your appearance does betray that impression, I will say.
Yeah. So so I find it baffling. I really find it baffling. And like some of the men wear the embroidered shirts, and I'm going, like, it clearly says this is a Russian Orthodox church. Like, why? And the Russians just like they just put up with it. They don't judge them. Even our priests are from Ukraine, but they're not, and they're fluent in Russian, but they don't ever talk about the war ever, and or where the sentiments lie. Um, yeah. So I guess a lot of people don't know that about me. Now you do. I'm not Russian, by the way. But this is a church where I go to confession and I take communion. I do sometimes go to a Macedonian Orthodox church. Of course, I am Macedonian, and sometimes a Serbian church. But so I thought I'd tell you that these shades of patriotism do exist. They really are real. I remember for Orthodox Christmas seeing this young plump kid with this like baby face, but he's tall. He's maybe an inch shorter than I am, and he's wearing this big he's wearing this loose, almost torn up, like well worn Ukrainian T-shirt. With the help me out here, the spear that they used to hunt fish with,
As a trident.
the trident, yes. And I'm going like, used. I gave him looks like, and he knew I was upset with him. First of all, because he looked like a bum on Christmas. Second of all, like, what? Why are you wearing this? Like I can show him where the Ukrainian church is. You can go there. Anyways, so these, I guess our audience will be surprised to hear this, but why don't we carry on? Why don't we carry
Yeah,
on?
I
So,
won't. I won't carry on the subject too longer. But
mm,
it is interesting because the local Russian Orthodox Church, by local I mean like like within an hour of me. I'm not gonna location dox too much. It's like dead in the center of like the Ukrainian ethnic enclave, and if you talk to many of the people there, I mean, I don't know many of the people there too well. A lot of them probably would tell you they are Ukrainian, so it is a weird mix. I will say. So just I want you to know, I want the audience to know, this isn't just some isolated incident because I can account for
Yeah,
probably at least one other instance of
yeah,
this. But do continue.
yeah. It's very strange. I think a lot of Westerners won't understand it. Honestly, I think even a lot of Slavs from the Balkans may not understand it, but
Not sure if I even understand
I'm
it.
not sure. So the next front we're going to take a look at is the Liman front, but also the Lyman Siversk front. So let's go to that slide. So I've circled Liman and I've circled Siversk. Liman is the much bigger circle, kind of in the center, just northwest of the center. And sorry, that's Liman. And the smaller circle near the bottom right hand corner, that's Siversk. So the Russians have made some gains in this area. The first one you can see where the two little pistol icons are is south of Toresk. So Torske is a village that the Russians really needed to capture because they it helped them establish a foothold on but east of the Zherebets River, and so now they are there, and the Russians keep moving and capturing more and more of that forested area. That's what you see, that big long salient and that lilac color. So in the southern area is where the Russians crucially are beginning to take over the town of Yampil. And so Yampil is kind of like a gateway town to get to towns like Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. But it is also in the rear of Seversk. So you can see that these gains happened almost in the center between Liman and Seversk. Let's zoom in a little bit closer to the ground taken in Yampil. And you can see this is a town situated on a river in a marshy area, surrounded by forests all around its north and western sections, and a marsh and a river on its southern and eastern flank. Um, Now, the Russians uh, got a toehold in here about 2, 3 days ago, and now they're just expanding on that. Let me get rid of the next slide because I think it's more or less like a repeat of what I've already said. So the next slide is basically Seversk, and I'll talk a little bit about what's going on here. So this strange salient that you see by the Russians, this sort of finger going up, and then it's not, the area around it is neither colored in blue or red. The reason is this is kind of turned into a no man's land, and there isn't a lot of data coming in for us to know. Now, I have seen some recent slides that came today just from Syriac maps. So the Russians are moving into this area that's not colored. Today, that is the case. Now, you can see Seversk that I've outlined in red. On directly above Seversk is a large water reservoir and a river, and this gives it a certain fortification. So the Russians, what they'll want to do is connect the region I was just talking about, Yampil, and this area north of Seversk. Once they have this worked out, and of course there's a Severodonetsk River that runs between them. So once they have this, the rest of this marshy and forested area, Yampil is taken, then these two sides can connect. I don't think they'll. It would, if they decide to go into Seversk from like where they are right now, directly like from the closest area that they're positioned to, I would say the Ukrainians have then abandoned Seversk, but I don't think they will. So well, I guess what I'm saying is the end game for Seversk is still a bit of a ways off. It's even further off for a city like Lyman. But for a city like Pokrovsk, and this is why we suspect that if there is going to be a Ukrainian front, it will be a defensive action to try to push the Russians out of Pokrovsk, because other towns, like for instance Konstantinovka, are still in the beginning stages. Remember that about 25-30% of Pokrovsk is already occupied, right? And so the end game is very close for Pokrovsk, despite the efforts of the Ukrainians. So, anyways, but for Siversk, it's closer than it is for Liman, and for Konstantinovka, which is further south from this region, it's even closer. So let's go to the next slide, which is the Zaporizhzhia front. And that outline that you see with the arrows, okay, so that outline are river systems. You can see the orange outline. That orange outline represents um, the Dnepropetrovsk region. So it's not one of the four regions that the Russians have claimed, just so you know. But what they will want to do is capture and fill in this area. Because once they do, there will be a river at anything north or west or south of them. That circle that you see at the bottom center, that's Gulyapolye. And Gulyapolye is a major town. It's not exactly big, but it is a hub for this region of eastern Zaporozhye. So they're going to want to fill this area in. And once they have command of this area and they're protected, they are flanked by two separate rivers. They're then going to want to go further south to Gulyapolye. Let's take a closer look of this area. I'm gonna delete the slide directly above this one, so now we can go a little closer.
Okay.
Okay. This is more zoomed in. You can see that the Russians made some gains today. So they're working on one of the river systems beneath the fortifications and one above them. So the bigger one, of course, is again below some water reservoirs and a river system. I imagine in the next few weeks, these rivers are going to get larger because of the rain. Um, the rain in the fall, if I'm not mistaken, in Ukraine is a little less than that in spring. But the Rasputitsa, I think will probably happen like it always does, and usually it's the end of October when the ground is like drenched. So that is it for the um for the map updates. I suppose we should uh we should talk about some of the massive strikes that the Russians and the Ukrainians have imposed on each other.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, so yesterday apparently it seems like the last show that we did was on the heels of the largest strike that the Russians had ever done. So yesterday a strike larger than that happened. I've heard some say like a combination of drones and missiles and hypersonic missiles reaching a total of 800. The vast majority, of course, are going to be all drones. Were set in motion and by the Russians, and this is probably because uh, Israel has donated a Patriot system to Ukraine, and two more are coming. Um, in recent statements by Zelensky, he mentioned this, and I have no doubt. So I think the Russians are trying to saturate this area. Now the Russians have hit. The last time I forgot, but the Russians hit one of the centers where the Ukrainians make their own version of the KH-101 missile, but also there was a plant where they were manufacturing like a dummy, a spin-off of the Taurus missiles by Germany. So that plant was destroyed, and the Russians also destroyed the plant where the what is it? The Swan. It was
I
an it
believe
was
so.
yeah, the Swan missile system that the Ukrainians have been working on. Now, It's obvious now that the Russians are suffering from attacks on their oil and gas sites, but there was already an attack that happened in Crimea that claimed some lives there. The Ukrainians attacked some civilian areas, so they don't attack just, you know, uh, oil sites. And then yesterday, about 240 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, the Ukrainians used their Neptune missiles. Now, as far as I understand, the Neptune missiles are actually British missiles, and they hit the Elektrodetl plant in Karachev, Bryansk region. This is an area, let's say, not far from where the Kursk salient took place, just a little east of there. So, um, you know, I don't know what to say, but this is a good segue to talk about. Essentially, what the Americans are going to do is supply the Ukrainians with Tomahawk missiles.
What about the Flamingo missile? Did they ever get that off the ground?
That's right. That's right. Was it the flamingo? Yes, you're right. It's called not the Swan, the Flamingo.
Yes. I
That
wasn't sure
plant
that
was
there might
hit.
have been a Swan one because they go through so many of these. I kind of lose track.
Yeah.
But I did want to pivot to Trump's supposed 180 on the Ukraine issue. So
Yeah.
I'm getting his Truth Social post up, and
Yes.
this is
Yes.
from the beginning of this week. So I'm sure you all have seen this, and there's a lot of ways to read this. So I'll just read it, and I'll get into my thoughts on it and what we can really make of this. So let's clear my throat because these Truth Social posts are always like reading a novel. After getting to know and fully understand the Ukraine-Russia military and economic situation,
Oh,
after
he
seeing the,
didn't know before. Now he knows.
you
Now he
know,
knows. It's
I'm
so
glad.
ridiculous.
I'm glad that the president's top people took 8 months to get this information to him. Makes me feel really confident in this administration. Uh, and seeing the economic trouble it's causing Russia, I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win. All caps for
Oh
those of
yeah.
you who are listening audio only. All of Ukraine back in its original form.
And then some.
Oh, of course, yeah. You know those Greater Ukraine maps that they like to circulate around from 1919 or whatever. They're gonna take Kuban. They're gonna take all of it. They're gonna take
Yep.
all of it. With time, patience, and the financial support of Europe, in particular NATO. Uh, I mean, let's think about what European countries aren't in NATO. Switzerland, a few microstates, and a few Balkan countries. Really, at this point, Moldova. Like
Yeah.
what's what's the distinction there? The original borders capitalized only the first letter though, from where the war capitalized first letter started, is very much an option. Why not? Russia's been fighting aimlessly for 3.5 years. A war once again capitalized that should not have taken a real military power, all capitalized on that as well. Less than a week to win. This is not distinguishing Russia. In fact, it's very much making them look like a quotation marks paper tiger end quotation marks. When the
Oh
people living in
boy.
Moscow and all the great cities, towns, and districts all throughout Russia find out what is really going on with this capitalized war, the fact that this is almost impossible for them to get gasoline capitalized through the long lines that are being formed and all
Oh
other
yeah.
things that are taking place in their war economy capitalized, where most of their money is being spent on fighting Ukraine, which has the which has great spirit capitalized and only getting better. Ukraine would be able to take back their country capitalized in its original form, and who knows, maybe even go further than that. Putin and Russia are in big, all caps, economic trouble. And this is the time for Ukraine to act. In any event, I wish both countries capitalized well. We continue to supply weapons for NATO and for NATO to do what they want with them. Good luck to all. Oh, thank you. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America. Now,
Where do you even begin, right?
when I first heard this, I wasn't shocked at all because you look at the
Yeah.
write ups from Trump's campaign, even going back to Pompeo in March of 2024, this was, if Russia doesn't accept our initial offer, we're just going to dump everything in Ukraine. They can totally win. That was, and not that Pompeo's in the best terms of Trump, but he's still at an arm's length distance from the administration, at least in my assessment. Now, somebody can correct me if
Mm-hmm.
I'm wrong there, but if not him, his people. And a lot of people were like, "Oh, how could this be? What? How could Trump do this?" Or some of the usual suspects were like, "Oh, well, Trump finally gets it, and he's gonna stand up to Russia." Blah blah blah. He's finally broken the Kremlin curse. Who can? I can't believe it. Robert Mueller finally did it, and America is free and democracy is okay, but Trump is still a fascist somehow. But getting on to a more serious note, if that's even possible, given these statements, a lot of people looked at them with a very skeptical eye, for which
Yeah.
I do not blame them. Because he does say outright in the post that he wants to supply NATO with the arms and armaments for them to, quote, do what they want. And that was reinforced by further comments by J.D. Vance about selling Europe the Tomahawk missiles to give to Ukraine. Where some people say this is Trump taking it out, some people say that this is him really playing into the narrative of the past 3.5 years. Russia's weak, Russia's losing, so the big bad European Union can take care of Russia on its own. And while I'm sympathetic to that, I think it is something else entirely. I think what this is this is Trump keeping a foot in both camps, where as this continues to grow into worse of a situation on the front lines, Trump can shift the blame towards the Europeans. But if there's any initiative that Ukraine can really be recovered and that this war can be fought on any grounds that actually looks like, I suppose, a stalemate would be best case scenario, Trump can say, we're all the way with Ukraine, we're standing up to Russian aggression. So Trump right now, in my opinion, not that I think it's, his idea originally, but his team, his foreign policy staff, what they're trying to do with these kind of rambling and coherent message, which I'm sure he himself authored, is that he is deliberately not picking a side so he can tip one way or the other, depending on what happens, and let's just say for a rough time frame, the next 6 months.
Right. And in so much he's insulting Russia in this statement, he's also washing his hands to a limited degree. He's saying, come on, Russia's weak. Anybody can take them. We're just going to give NATO these weapons and send them to Ukraine, and then Ukraine will win. Ta-da! Right. That's basically what he's saying. But I agree with you that he does want a foot in each camp. Although I will say after 8 9 months, Kellogg won the apparent struggle between him and Vance, which there wasn't really any. Vance is essentially repeating the same lines. So they're basically threatening the Russians, if you don't freeze the conflict, because we're winning, if you don't freeze the conflict as we're winning, we're going to give tomahawks to the Ukrainians, and then they're going to fly them into Moscow, and it won't be just silly drones that it will hit an apartment building and destroy someone's apartment. But it'll be real serious stuff, because tomahawks do have a range of well over 2,000 kilometers. I think like 2,500 kilometers. So, Kellogg called it, there's not going to be any sanctuary in Russia. So, of course, the Americans, um, they're overextended. Russia's extended, but I would say that America is more overextended. And this is why they want to freeze this conflict and return to it once they probably will go to war against Iran. And they will probably try to get a war off with Iran near the end of this year or the beginning of next year. And I think that's what Netanyahu's visit to Washington is all about. If America does this, there's a good chance that it'll be a disaster. Because now, if they don't do it, it'll probably be because the resolve of the Europeans, the NATO member states, and America is not there. and Russia is still too much of a force that they're unable to go into Iran. Of course, the quick and dirty and easy way to do it is to regime change Iran. So we could see another attempt at a regime change. I think the Americans understand uh, how vulnerable they would be if they tried to invade Iran, right? Um, there's nothing that suggests that the Iranians are ready to topple the Ayatollah regime. It's not just one Ayatollah, like it's the whole regime, the whole way of Iran since 1979 that for the Americans and the Israelis has to be stopped.
And I'm going to say this as a value neutral judgment. The system in Iran is probably like the most like textbook definition you could get of a theocracy, where religious leadership and government officials are really just that integrated. Where you're right, there are multiple ayatollahs, and while there is the I guess his title would be supreme leader in Khomeini, he is an ayatollah. But point being is there is an entire religious body of Shia Muslims who would be able to succeed him, and some might say some who are even more hardline, who are more willing to press the issue. And while I do agree with everything you're saying right now, that regime change in Iran is likely the goal that they want to start before the end of the year. And that's putting aside Venezuela because I think that kind of fizzled out, but who knows. But on that note, I will say I agree with everything you are saying in the abstract, but I do think it is a much more volatile situation that they have to play very carefully if they want to do it, given the Iranian performance in the 12-day war and given the exhaustion of American air defenses as a whole, particularly when it comes to the defense of Israeli skies, where while I'm not saying the Iranians would be able to fire enough missiles until Israel collapses, I don't. That's not how it works.
Yeah, two more THAAD systems have been placed
Yes.
in Israel.
It still is a
I,
volatile situation that could do an immense amount of economic and military damage to Israel. Perhaps they are willing to bear that cost right now in order to take care of the Iranian question. I don't know. But it is a volatile situation which can be very costly for both the United States and Israel, which I'm not saying is going to prevent them from trying this entirely, but it might create some pause.
right. Um, yeah. So the other issue, of course, you have is with the other NATO member states and the Europeans who are gung ho with a war against Russia. I guess this brings up the whole so-called Russian drones. I mean, I don't believe these Russian drones were launched by Russia. I think these were Russian drones that fell down from electronic warfare over the last 3 years, and the Ukrainians have been storing them for this kind of situation because let's just look at Pokrovsk, right? Like what you would want to do is break off that salient from the north that is across the river in order to protect Pokrovsk, because the Russians have had a very difficult time from the south, despite the fact that they have a very good foothold already inside the city. That would be a morale booster for the Ukrainians. And, so the situation for the Ukrainians is desperate. The Ukrainians can push back in one area, but the Russians will then exert and capture territory in another area. However slow it is, the Russians don't care. I think I'm convinced now that Putin wants to do two things with the war in Ukraine. He does not want the war to expand, definitely not against NATO, but he does want it to drag on. Because the longer he drags it on, the more of an investment black hole this will be for the Americans and for the Europeans. I think even before the war started, I remember in one of our podcasts, I said it would. I'm sure the Russians, Putin is looking at Ukraine and turning it into a black hole for them.
Yes, I do remember we said that towards the beginning of the war. And
Yes,
what I think is interesting about that in particular is that it's a reversal of the West's intention in Ukraine, where it
Yeah.
was supposed to be the black hole for Russia, but they turned around. And I want to just emphasize once again that is at the cost of the complete collapse of Ukrainian society, as we've seen, and the mass exodus of people, and let alone even the casualties. So, while I do am inclined to agree that the Russians are okay turning this new black hole, particularly coming probably straight from Putin, it is going to be a costly operation, and I don't think that even people who, like us, would be ostensibly considered pro-Russian should overlook that.
Yes. Yes. He's looking at this war as a way to rejuvenate Russia ideologically, right? You can see that it was Russia who, not China, but Russia who led the way in um, separating itself from what American and Western ideology of radical individual freedom and consumerism. Now, a lot of Russians are still infected by this. So, you know, um, men are dying at a slower rate than they were from alcoholism, which is one of the coping methods for such a thing. And you know, vodka consumption is down. A lot of things are better, but they're not ideally where they need to be. And the gamble, of course, is also that it will improve the demographics for the next generation, not so much this one. So I would say that he wants a different Russia to re-emerge after this war. So this war is existential, but it's existential in an abstract way, not just it's existential on the Ukrainian battlefield. They kind of mirror each other in so much as they want to return to a Russian way of being, distinct and different from that of the Western. You know, he began instituting laws and changing of the Constitution in 2013 against, gay marriage and gay adoption. Though more and more of those laws were established. He wrote in the Constitution that Russia will always be its foundation was always the Slavic people, the Eastern Slavic people that make up what is Russia. And of course, that includes Belarus and Ukraine.
Yes, those were the 2020 reforms, which also
Yeah,
renewed his ability to stay in office for another term because he was, according to the prior Russian constitution, term limited. Now, while those limits still exist, with the adoption of a new constitution, everything was set to zero.
right, right. So he has been already steering Russia away from this because I think let's say from 2000, I mean, I think he took office at the end of December 99. Like, I mean, who cares? So from 2000 onwards to, I would say, probably around the time that Medvedev became president of Russia and the whole debacle with Georgia, I think he began to understand that the West doesn't want Russia as it is. That even having, like, part of Russia accepting radical individualism and consumerism is there to also, in the abstract, there to balkanize Russia, right? It's not just there to make Russia weak. It's there to balkanize it, because one of the things that you have historically with Russia is especially after the invention of the railroad, when it was obvious that the railroads were going to be contenders against the British dominance of the sea for trade. This is when fears of a Eurasian pact began to dominate the British mind. And, whether it's Hitler or Napoleon before him, this idea of creating Eurasia, uh, that would be the antithesis to the sea power of the British. And You even have, like, let's look at the example of Stalin. Stalin, after the Molotov-Ribbentrop pact, um, he orders his men not to shoot at the Germans, even if the Germans shoot at them. Now, I didn't know this until recently, but some Germans literally took their clothes off, swam across the river, and were telling the Russians, "We're going to invade you." Like these poor souls who did that were then shot by the Russians because the Russians thought these guys were spies. Now, I know a lot has been made, even by, like, let's say, even by historians that are pro-Russia, pro-Stalin, that Stalin was completely shocked by the invasion of Hitler because Stalin did the mistake of trusting Hitler. Stalin told Hitler he trusted him. But if we understand that Russia is the link between the East and the West, and it is a treasure trove of resources, everything necessary for the modern world, and it would have been more acute in 1933 than in 1812, then what Stalin does after that is kind of genius. And that is, he pretends he's surprised. He goes to his room. His army is overrun. Hundreds of thousands are captured. Of course, the Russians begin moving stuff east of the Urals, but he knows one thing for sure. He knows that if it looks like Germany will win, then the Americans will intervene. Because neither the British nor the Americans can have this Eurasia. And this war is very much about that, with a different ideology that is there to inspire rebellion in the sphere of Russian influence, and there to embolden European states why they should fight against evil Russia. So his strategy was right. He knew, and even Roosevelt himself said that he would be willing to fund both sides. Of course, British and American banks funded both sides of the Russian Revolution, because the whole point was that you would have them fight each other, then you slip in and you become the new authority after a lot of looting,
And
and
even turning
then
back the clock with that, American financiers funded both sides of World War One before the Americans got directly involved.
absolutely right. And so he knew the one thing that the West could not tolerate was the seizure of Russia by Germany. And it would have been any Germany. Forget the whole Nazi thing. It would have been any European power that could get Russia could not be allowed unless it was American or British.
The same reason they broke up the treaties that Bismarck brokered with the Russians as well,
Yep,
because it was Germany and Russia in the same sphere, whether that is achieved through force of arms or diplomacy, is unacceptable to the Anglo American world.
that's
Completely
right.
unacceptable.
That's right. That's right.
And
And
if you want to turn the clock forward, to go back to your point about Putin's overtures to be accepted in the West, you do have to recall the so-called Paris-Berlin-Moscow axis that was forming in the wake of the Iraq War. Three countries that disapproved of the Iraq War, that had some questioning of American leadership. Putin was making immense diplomatic overtures, especially to the Germans, but to a lesser extent the French as well. And the idea of Russia being integrated into the continent, possibly, I'm not going to say it was probable, but possibly on its own terms, was yet another unacceptable
mhm.
outcome for the Americans. Hence the reason for Bucharest '08 NATO expansion throughout the second Bush term.
Beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, that does tie in. So, like, let's say uh, if the Russians reacted to Hitler and there was a kind of a stalemate, the Germans are advancing, but not that much, somewhere around the Polish border. Uh, they would have been happy to fund both sides. The Americans were,
Yes,
right.
at that point, would
If
Britain
the
maybe take.
Russians preempted them and were ready to march on Berlin, then you would have seen the West react right away and side with the Russians, right? Um, so I hope people understand what Stalin's strategy was, and Putin's quite a strategist himself. So that's what I think is basically going on. That is what I think Putin has figured out. I think the years of naivete, probably in the first 8 or 10 years of his tenure as president, um, had to be reworked. Of course, he has to put on the front that he still wants to work and be a partner with the West, but he knows that at heart the ideology of the West is a nation killer, right?
Yes, absolutely. And like I said, if you go back to Putin, especially in the 2000s, I have no doubt that this young Germanophile, somewhat liberal man would have loved, like I said, integration into Europe on Russia's terms.
Absolutely.
But at least under the current circumstances, I don't know. Perhaps things will be different one day. Who
I think he
knows?
had a hope for that. I think he
Yes,
thought that was
yes.
possible.
But under
And also just to go back to World War II,
yes,
remember
please.
that as soon as World War II was over, the British were clamoring to invade Russia, like right away, which only supports the this other radical theory that that's not taught. Well, I mean, I've seen some people write and talk about it, this alternative idea, and I think the alternative idea is the right idea.
I yes, absolutely. I would agree. And with that, I suppose we can talk about the political impotence of Europe because I think that is a perfect segue. And it is a bit of old news, but I suppose we should touch on the Polish drones. You did start to, and I will pick up on the thread that you left a few minutes ago. And almost certainly, looking at the range of the drones, these were launched from Ukrainian airspace or somewhere in Belarus. Um, and if they were launched somewhere from Belarus, because there were reports of them over Belarusian airspace, it is possible Russian operatives could have used Belarus as a launching point for these drones. However, given the nature of the attack and given, let's just say, the recent history between Ukraine and Poland, since the start of this war, it lends itself much more to the idea that Ukraine was behind these attacks.
Mhm.
These were, as you said, likely collected drones from electronic warfare. These systems were repurposed. These were virtually all recon or decoy drones. Nothing that could really carry any substantial payload, that couldn't do any real damage, that landed near targets, that harassed Polish airspace, yet did not do any strikes or have any damage.
They were unarmed.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And even if they would have been armed, the capability to arm those things would have been minuscule compared to, let's just say, other drones in the Russian arsenal. Some people take the more middle of the road approach that this is just Russia prodding Polish airspace in retaliation for, say, similar acts from NATO, which I'm not unsympathetic to the argument, but I think as time goes on, as more evidence comes out, it looks more and more like uh, that this was a Ukrainian false flag, especially if you recall in the autumn of 2020, about 3 years ago, the S-300 missile that landed in Poland and killed two people in rural Poland that they tried to say was a Russian missile was a Ukrainian missile. Now, of course, they claimed it was an accident. It was a misguided missile. But given what we know, it may very well have been a false flag. It may very
Hmm.
well have been a setup to get Poland more involved, especially because at that point, Poland, both on the government level and on the civilian level, were very enthusiastic about this conflict. Now, while the support remains on the government level, and while there's no love lost between Poland and Russia as peoples, the Polish people are weary of this war to the point where Donald Tusk is coming out and scolding them, saying, "Oh, you might be tired of this. You might think this isn't our fight, but it is." Blah blah blah. Blah. The same speech these people always give. Navratsky was elected somewhat on, let's just say, Ukrainian fatigue, people tired of dealing with the war in Ukraine as a whole, but more particularly Ukrainians within Poland. And you're already seeing the rollback of refugee benefits, especially to military aged men in Poland. However, Navratsky also is captured by the establishment. That we should make no mistake that this guy is quote unquote pro Russia, despite claims to the contrary. But you do see this coming out, and at a time when, let's just say, pro Ukraine sentiments in Poland are probably lower than they were at the start of the war, it makes sense that they would want to gin up the idea of Russian aggression that once we fall, you're next. The same line that we've been hearing since before 2022, as a matter of fact. And the other piece of evidence I have that's relatively recent news that this was a false flag is the fact that you also had drones harassing Hungarian airspace. Who do you think is going to be harassing Hungarian airspace, given the circumstances, given the dispute over energy, given the Druzhba pipeline, given the what may very well have been the attempted assassination of Orban via car bomb as he departs from Moscow? That happened last July, around the same time of the Trump assassination attempt, the first Trump assassination attempt. We'll talk about Ryan Ruth later. But when you have those events in such close succession, in my mind, perhaps I'm too biased here, but in my mind, there is little to no doubt that this was a Ukrainian op to get Poland
Yeah.
involved, or at least to rejuvenate support for the war by drumming up fear about Russian aggression, the idea that Poland is next. And while I do think that anti Russia sentiments, for a number of reasons, most of which being historical, are very strong in Poland, I don't think many people, if you were to press them on the issue, think that they are under immediate threat. Now, maybe in the Baltic states, that hysteria exists more, but I don't think that exists in Poland necessarily. So the idea of drumming up fear, creating a false flag, forcing NATO to invoke Article 4, where they have a discussion about a discussion about a discussion, uh, that'll put fear in the hearts of the Russians, as we all know. But I mean, like I said, after I saw the story about Hungary, it's like, yeah, this is Ukraine, no question about it. And this is the move of a desperate, flailing country that is trying to expand this conflict in order to stabilize its own front lines.
Right. Let's say that, you know, the Europeans, the Americans do have a red line. Like one of the red lines is Russia not freezing the conflict, right? That's why America is going to give the Ukrainians Tomahawk missiles, and this is why they will wait to see what the effect of the Tomahawk missiles are before they go any further. Another red line might be um, you'll hear a clamoring, like if Pokrovsk falls in the next month, you're going to hear a kind of clamoring, a kind of desperation. Stuff will happen, but long term, the the city that the West does not want Russia to take is Odessa. To cut Ukraine completely off from the Black Sea will be something that I think will be intolerable for the West, because at that point, Ukraine will be an even bigger black hole financially for the EU than it already is. But Putin doesn't seem to be in a hurry to get to Odessa, right? Um, he's he still doesn't think that Russia is ready to fight full on with NATO. And I think what he's doing right now is a kind of deplete them as much as possible before a much more cataclysmic war, if it's even imaginable, could happen over Odessa. The Europeans, on the other hand, are not ready either, in terms of like the kind of armies that they can commit. Remember that, Starmer said that they're going to reach the 5%, but they're going to do that by 2030. So that's still ways off. There's a few countries that are doing the 5%. At least two of the three Baltic countries, Lithuania is one of them, I believe. But these are very small countries. They're 2 million or less, 5% from such a small population. They're essentially the size of a small city. What can they really do, right?
Look, I'll have
America's
you
looking for
know
country.
that Estonia
Yeah.
upped their arsenal from one Mosin Nagant to two.
Wow. Be afraid. I mean, America's waiting. They're waiting for France, Germany, and Britain to reach this, right? Um,
I mean, and
because
even
they
then,
need they
even
need Europe at war with Russia to defeat Russia, so they can focus on Iran and China.
yes, yes, but even then, I think the British have what something close to only 20,000 combat-ready troops in their entire military.
Yeah, I mean their army is about 180,000. It's pretty big for not a very big country. It's about 80 million. I saw some statistics that they're again, it's like what could the Europeans put in Ukraine? Probably 40,000, maybe at best 55 to 60,000
And that's assuming half the
troops.
countries don't get cold feet, like the Italians, like the Poles, like the Spanish, like some of the other
Yeah,
minor countries as well.
yeah, Tusk is telling them that this war is our war, but he's not saying we got to go in. Like, why are you keep saying it's your war, but you're not going in? Like you've been doing that for 3 years. Go in. The Russians are a paper tiger. Go in.
Now, what I do think is interesting on the flip side of this coin is that there was, I believe it was yesterday, it was a bridge opening ceremony between Slovakia and Hungary that Orban was speaking at. And one of the points he made, which was interesting because for all his faults, he has been at the forefront of skepticism towards this war and really finding an off ramp for Europe where everyone can save face. Now, whether that's even possible at this point, who knows? But that's been the stated position since before the start of this conflict, saying that both Slovakia and Hungary were dragged into two world wars against their will, which I'm sure you can parse out that statement. I'm sure you can
Uh-huh.
find flaws in it, but I think the sentiment behind it is interesting. That these small countries that are part of larger imperial bodies, as they would have been in the prior world wars as they are today with the European Union, are at least these two have the ability to speak out and say, this is too much, because if the slaughter continues west, we're next in line. We have no real outstanding grievances the Russians at this current time that would justify our countries looking like Ukraine does today. You saw these sentiments try to creep through in Romania with Georgescu, which, of course, that was shut down very quickly. You saw these sentiments in Moldova, which recently rigged their election, trying to get Maya Sandu out of power. Of course, she managed to get in by the slimmest margins. But throughout Europe, you do have these sentiments. I would actually say both East and West, these people realizing that, well, the broader plan, if you actually take the implication of war with Russia seriously, means that we're going to be the front line at some point, that we're going to have to be the ones fighting and dying. And for what, really? Drumming up anti Russian sentiments, even among people who don't like Russia, only goes so far. And at a certain point, like I said, even Poland, which you figured would be the hotspot of that, nobody is really willing to take that next logical step of force of arms or putting Polish troops in Ukraine because they realize that, yeah, okay, we can have whatever grievances we want, but coming home in body bags maybe isn't the preferable option. And there's a few European leaders, like I said, for all their flaws, Fico and Orban are two who will say that. And of course, there's various opposition figures throughout Europe who will also say things to a similar effect. But I think the reality is becoming more stark. I think even though these statements have been made for 3.5 years since the start of this war, they are becoming more prescient. They are carrying more weight because the possibility is becoming more real. Now, to return to your point, I don't think that Europe has the combat readiness in order to confront Russia, and I know they throw on the 2027, 2030 figures, possibly by then. But as it looks like right now, even with a full shift to war economies, it would take Europe several years to be ready to go toe to toe with the Russians, and at what cost and for what benefit. So, while there is certainly more than enough will among the political elites for this project, And while I think there are forces out there on both sides of the Atlantic who will pull out every stop in order to make something like this happen, um, when you look at just the brass tacks, when you get down to brass tacks, it seems like a much more unlikely prospect.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not moving quickly enough, which makes me wonder what will the Americans do to freeze this conflict? Because really, in many ways, Iran is being protected by Russia fighting a war in Ukraine,
I'm
right?
glad you brought that up because that actually leads to my next point, the shift towards Iran. Now, the primary driver of this is coming out of course, Tel Aviv, which by extension comes out of Washington. But the other JCPOA signatories, particularly Britain, France, and Germany, are trying to trigger the snapback sanctions that were in the original agreement in order to
Mm.
return Iran to a pre 2015 condition. Now, at this point, the Iranians have made enough inroads with the Russians and the Chinese where it wouldn't be that bad. But any semblance of detente with the Iranians, any semblance of trying to improve relations or ease tensions with the Iranians, as far as the Western European leaders are concerned, is off the table. And these are people who were calling Trump and visiting Washington in 2018 when Trump was threatening to pull out of the deal, begging him not to. But now that he has, now that the United States has been out of this deal, like I said, since 2018 for 7 years now, you have the European leaders coming around to what was really inevitable, in my opinion, where they are activating the snapback sanctions. They are going to be supportive of hawkish action against the Iranians, and this is all while they're playing the double game, especially in the UK and in France, of this recognition of the Palestinian state. And I don't want to jump the gun on that issue yet, but uh, there's more to that. I'll talk about that when we get into some of the stuff about the UN, but that is what we're looking at this point. Trump had that ridiculous meeting with Starmer where they couldn't bring him into London because he would face protest, and more importantly, those would bleed over into disapproval with Starmer because he's so unpopular. I mean, let's take the principal Western European leaders. I don't have the figures on hand, but you could probably do the math on this. Do they have a combined approval rating of over 50% when you take the leaderships of Britain, France, and Germany? I would
Yeah.
be shocked if it came anywhere close. I mean, what Starmer's at 13, Macron's I think is like 18, and Mertz I think is also like dragging the low teens in terms of approval rate. None of these people have any mandate. Uh, France just had to reshuffle its government again. Has a new prime minister. Has what is effectively parliamentary deadlock, and this is all on top of the question of IMF bailouts for Western European countries, and it's complete political dysfunction, and there's no two ways
See,
about it.
see, that's to me, this salient fact that you bring up is another reason why I'm worried of something desperate taking place, like a false flag, right? You have all these drone stories, and right now, yes, I know in Denmark you have people, calling the police, and the police telling them don't call for every single light you see in the sky. I thought that was hilarious. But what they're really trying to do is condition them that Russia, is led by a crazy man who wants to take over all of Europe, right? And as long as Putin is dragging, but also depleting the West by just fighting at a slow pace in in Ukraine, right? That will always act as a contradiction to whatever it is that the Europeans are saying. But don't underestimate the normie and the normie to be persuaded, right? It could even be that some of them might, even the British included, that the best way to get out of financial and economic troubles is to go to war. And this is why I'm afraid that, the first, second, third, fourth time, it's those pesky Ruskies. Maybe it's not even the Russians, and then something horrible happens, and he makes a statement that we're going to war. I know people say that if most of the young men in Western European countries don't want to fight for their government. But, neither do a lot of Ukrainians. And you just, I mean, I think if you asked me a few months ago, I would have been more confident that they wouldn't. But I think what kind of measures that they're willing to go to the Western states in order to get men to go fight in Ukraine, I don't know. I'm less certain of it.
I think they're
I'm not certain. Either way, but I'm less certain that they won't.
I think there's a missing puzzle piece here, which is my big concern, and that is the populist psyop, where they got Trump back in, and confidence among right wingers in the empire is at an all time high. What was the enlistment boost in terms of when
Yeah,
Trump
it was
in
huge.
January 2025? It was huge. Like military recruitment numbers almost met their targeted goals because Trump came back. Right now, you have Farage preparing for some sort of political comeback, and I know that there's some skepticism that he's compromised, which I'm open to the
Oh,
idea.
for sure.
I'm not too familiar. I haven't kept up with him since Brexit, really, but I'll take the word of people I trust on that issue. Uh, there are attempted purges in the AFD right now to try to make it a more quote unquote establishment party because they were one of the more renegade populist parties, and I'm sure there's some sort of political ruminations in France for a so-called quote-unquote based right wing to come to power. Italy, we see the compromised populist government there. So I do think if we're looking at a course of the next, let's say 5 years to give a rough estimate to it, they are laying the groundwork for this. Because right now, no, if they were to false flag it tomorrow, I don't think it would work. But if they were to false flag it in let's just say 2029 for just a random date. That might have a chance if they do let the quote unquote populists work their quote unquote magic and have the illusion of based government.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we've been talking about, so-called base governments coming to the fore because of the war in Ukraine right from the beginning, even before the war started.
And I think that's the move going forward. I think that's why they are uh, allowing these people to have their redemption arcs, like Trump, like Farage, and that's not even to speak of the Israeli or Middle Eastern issues, because that's also another big part of it, because they're all very much invested in the continuation of the Israeli project, which it's like I said, there's a number of elements here, but I said it, I believe, our last episode, and I'll say it again. I am gravely concerned about the state of Europe and that they are sleepwalk. I don't even know if sleepwalking is the word for it, but are walking straight into a cataclysmic war on the scale of World War One or World War Two. I'm not even necessarily saying it would be a world war, but a continent-wide war that would devastate dozens of countries, both in terms of lives lost, lives ruined, economic potential wasted, and uh, collapse of society and civilization, to put it mildly. And I'm not even saying that. I'm not even saying who would win that, because I think right now militarily the Russians have an advantage, but that would be a deep, deep cost to them. And to repeat what we've been saying for the past couple episodes, the Anglo-American Empire in particular would be okay with that outcome so long as they were king of the ashes.
Hmm.
But I suppose with that going forward, we should talk about the recent glut of political violence in the United States. I think probably the most infamous case recently being the Kirk assassination.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to sit here and relitigate all the details or even get into deeper theories about it, because I think that has already been done by people who are far more competent doing that for me. But I want to talk about the impacts and the potential future ramifications of that. But he was assassinated at one of his campus events on the 10th of September, so that was about 2.5 weeks ago. Actually, almost 3 weeks ago at this point. And you get more information about the shooter. It's one of the usual suspects, one of these people who is in a relationship with, let's just say, somebody of an unconventional persuasion. I don't know how much I can get away with saying in that regard. Uh, who was
It's all very normal. Very
convinced by his
normal.
father to turn himself in. Which, I mean, look, if my son embraced that life path even before embracing political violence, I don't have kids, but I'd have a hard time with that one. I really would have a hard time with that one, coping with the fact that someone related to me would embrace that kind of lifestyle. But I'm getting lost in the weeds here, and it sparked the usual reactions, right wing outrage that didn't really amount to anything substantially in the political sense. Left wing sort of, I don't even know the word for it, depravity. What we would normally expect from these people. They get up there and hoot and holler and cheer, and they're like, "Oh, can we do this again?" Blah blah blah. And I'm not gonna spend all day going, person by person. This person said that. This person said that, because, like I said, that's been done already. But it did show that, yes, there is that stark divide. Kirk, once again, I think enough time has passed where we can speak more frankly about it. I don't think he was even like a bad or immoral man, but he was establishment conservative. Right there, had the ear of the president and the vice president. Although there were some inklings of him, I don't know, maybe leapfrogging on some positions, like maybe slightly less pro-Israel than he would have been in prior years or whatever. But point being is, yes, you can talk about, like, yeah, he was established conservative for all of its faults or all of its merits, whatever. But it does show that we are in a situation where a certain seal has been broken. And I think that this was a long time coming. I think this came with the first Trump election with the Antifa riots. I'm sure you guys recall back in 2017, 2018, when every weekend there would be a street war in Portland between some right-wing organization and Antifa because they would try to have some rally. And then Charlottesville was another one of these sort of events that continued on. You had the attempted assassination of the congressman back in 2017 with that deranged guy who shot them at, I think it was like the baseball field or whatever. And there's a few other ones among this. But just this slow boiled political violence that had been reemerging throughout the late 2010s after Trump got elected into where we are present day. It, I think, really culminated in the first Trump assassination attempt where he got shot in the ear by, what was his name, Thomas Crooks, who was almost immediately liquidated after that.
Yeah.
And then you had the Ryan Ruth thing, which I'll talk about the Ryan Ruth conviction, because that was morbidly entertaining the way he reacted to that. I don't want to relish too much in that, but I do think it's worth discussing, and I'll get into that in a couple minutes after I get past this. And then after Trump got elected, it was the normal hysteria, which I think most people would have written off as, say, oh, whatever, we've seen 8 years of this, big whoop. But then you have this thing where Charlie Kirk gets his neck blown open in the middle of a crowd. And like I said, a pretty mainstream political figure, establishment Republican talking points, just kind of, like I said, just kind of like what you'd expect from your average everyday Republican. For any of you out there with like the boomer uncle or grandpa who has those kind of opinions, he probably loved Charlie Kirk. My mostly apolitical parents would see the little snippets of it, and they thought it was the greatest thing ever. But
I mean, he was still he was still a doofus. I mean, for people like us,
yeah, like I said,
who are concerned about the future and fate of people of European descent. I mean, he's a dummy.
Yeah, it's, and like I said, I think I'm kind of glad we haven't had a chance to record, because I think the dust is settled enough where we can have a more honest assessment without, talking about a man who just recently died. But yeah, he never really moved much from his establishment conservative beliefs. I'm sure if you talked to him on a one-on-one level, he was a fine guy. But in terms of political operative, he was, in my opinion, out of touch. But I don't, even after all that, the point is that he is viewed worthy of death by certain elements of American society. And I think that has some terrible implications, especially for people like us.
Absolutely.
I mean, and they also love to combine around the same time of, oh, you have to give your name, address, and every personal information if you want to use the internet and look at anything that's not completely sanitized. Give
So
us
we
your
can kill
ID.
you.
Exactly, exactly. Like, if they're gonna if they're gonna shoot him in the neck, it's like, what are they gonna do to you? Like, and I think that's, like I said, that's a point that's been made many times over. But if we're at the point where, like, mainstream Republicans are just being gunned down in broad daylight, then I think we are in a hell of a situation. Then also to talk about this, I'm trying to think of an expletive I can use that won't get us yanked off the air. This very exceptional individual who attacked this ICE facility and ended up only killing the detainees instead of the officers there, before taking his own life. That was just a few weeks after that, and we've reached, in my opinion, now I'm not one of those people who say like, oh, civil war is imminent, but we've reached a fever pitch where political violence, for the time being, in my opinion, has become normalized, and I think that there
Hmm.
are a lot of factors behind that. I think a lot of it does have to do with some, I guess, what you could call turf wars among the elites, where they realize that they are losing on many fronts, both at home and abroad. So they are willing to start taking more drastic actions. And but regardless, of whatever the reason might be, you, me, everyone listening to the show, and probably anyone you know who has ever been somewhat politically active, in many ways have been conscripted into a fight that is really of no concern to, at least in my opinion, any of us. Like,
Yeah.
I'll say outright, in terms of any political violence, I have no intention of participating because, number one, I don't believe in it. Number two, I'm not going to be made into a foot soldier in anyone's war. I'm sorry, it's not going to be the case. Like, what I would actually have to take up, and I'm speaking purely within the confines of a hypothetical where a situation of using force of arms would be considered legitimate either for my personal self defense or in service of some sort of defense of my homeland. Hypothetically speaking, all of that. But in order to get me to take up arms to defend something, that has to be pretty drastic. And like I said, while I you know, wouldn't say like I'm completely distanced from the conservative movement. I think it's kind of inevitable for anyone in these circles to at least have some ties to it. It's not something I'm willing to put my life on the line for. And some might say
Mm.
that, well, that's a strange take from a guy who gets on here and every week and does this show. Perhaps it is. But point being, and I would say the same to all of you, that none of these organizations, none of these people, none of these so-called political messiahs, and I'm not saying that there's no use for politics by no means, or else I wouldn't do the show, but none of them are worth you laying down your life. I'll just say it, and I think that's the main takeaway I get from this assassination of Kirk.
Yeah, I mean, I went back and forth when this happened. Of course, my health was not good. I was at all. I was in. Um, I don't want to get into it because it's kind of a self-dox, but I couldn't be with you to record or to record with you guys from the crew at World War Now, unfortunately. But I initially thought there was a possibility that Israel could have killed him, but when I watched more and more videos, I don't think he was making this big turn that a lot of people wanted him to make. And I can understand why you would want him to make this turn. But when I watched especially the full video of him with Shapiro, right? He's playing devil's advocate more than anything else. And really, him becoming a Zio Christian was what gave this guy a purpose in life. I'm sure he felt God was blessing him because he was blessing Israel. And that's why he was becoming so rich. Yes, virtually every one of his founders are Zionist Jews. Like, yes, I know. But what he's basically, his disagreement with them is that their messaging sucks. And the reason he can't take money directly from Netanyahu is it completely delegitimizes him. He can't take the money. Even if Netanyahu wasn't a war criminal, people would be suspicious. But Netanyahu is a war criminal. He is disgusting. Israel is a disgusting society, right? And Now I don't know if this letter is real, but apparently he wrote a letter to Israel. I can understand the suspicion, but in it again, he's basically saying kind of like what I'm saying, and I leave room open that this is just Israeli elites or American elites, which are essentially the same thing, to have made up this letter. However, he basically repeats the same thing, that it's becoming more and more difficult for him to defend everything that Israel is doing. Now, I think some Israelis understood that he would have to criticize, like when he was on that show with what's his name, David Ben something, the Iranian quote unquote Christian with the Jewish name,
It, I know who you're talking about. I can't
Patrick
place.
Ben David or
Oh, yeah,
something.
that guy.
That guy, right? He basically says, yeah, they're gonna genocide them, like as if they weren't already doing that. But he has to acquiesce, right? Because his brand is there to argue fairly why you should support America and Israel and be a Zio Christian and accept Zio Christian beliefs, right? And it's just very, the brand was going through a difficult time. Now, this guy's he's died at 31. He's been doing this since he was 19. And he, in the last 4 or 5 years, he's really, picked up steam. One of the most fascinating things is how, like, the guys at the gray zone, Blumenthal and Mate, but particularly Blumenthal, are pushing this idea that it was the Israelis, right? I thought that was interesting. I thought, like, the takes from other people, that was a really interesting dynamic, because these people, I can see why Israel should be blamed. It, in my head, Israel is not directly responsible, but I would like them to get the blame nonetheless, because that's funny shit. if if that makes sense for you all.
Then you've probably been here for a while.
Yeah. Like, I think I remember being at the church coffee hour saying that. People were like in hysterics. Some people were concerned, but other people were just laughing.
I feel like that's every personal anecdote you tell.
So I said, they're going to get the blame, and who cares? Honestly, who cares? They deserve it. In many ways, the Zionist Jews kind of did kill him, in so much as they were willing to push this guy and fund him. He was making, like, I think he had $80 billion, and Netanyahu was offering $150 billion, right? Basically twice what you have. He can't go for that. Like, Kirk is probably many things, but he's satisfied with $80 million, or like, I think he's satisfied with that. I don't. I don't think he was a megalomaniac in that way. I do think he did sincerely believe in what he was doing. I didn't like what he was doing. I don't like anyone who defends Israel. I don't care if you're listening to this program and you dislike me hearing that. And I don't like listening to him say America is just an idea, but Israel is a real people. Oh yeah, they're real people. But I mean, it's so stupid. But of course, as a lot of Zio Christians kind of live through, live out their nationalism through Israeli nationalism,
Yeah,
because that's, you know what I mean.
yeah, I do have to say, especially with him being so young, only a few years older than I am, it is a bit sad. And like I said, I agree with you. He was probably a true believer in what he said. I don't think there was too much grift going on there. That this is what a lot of people have been brought up with and have been really, like, the beliefs instilled with them. And while, like, obviously you are capable of changing your beliefs, you are capable of challenging your own views. Like, not only him, but I think in many ways he represents the millions of people in this country who have been lulled into just the establishment conservative line of all those things. And like I said, I don't want to portray like he is a victim first and foremost because he was literally assassinated. But
Yeah.
I don't want to
And it's
portray.
not fair. His
Yeah.
children saw this, his wife
Yes.
saw this.
Yes.
I do, of course, everybody should know. I completely I denounce what happened to him, right? I would prefer a world where he was still alive, even though I completely disagreed with him, than what happened to him. Because as you rightly point out, this will be, of course, worse for us too, but it'll be worse for everybody.
Yes, absolutely. And like I said, while like of course, I don't think he was a victim for necessarily like holding his views that like he could have taken the leap, he could have changed them, he could have challenged them in many other ways. But point being is, he was probably brought up the same way millions upon millions of Americans have been for the past several decades, where it is this very mainline or evangelical Protestant where. American 20th century liberalism is how you're supposed to organize society. Israel's our greatest ally, etc. And this is what he ended up living and dying for in a way. Now there were other
Yep.
views that he espoused that I think that you could probably find more favorable, but I don't know. I suppose it brings up the broader question of disappointment, the fact that this is such a prominent force in our society, and then on top of that, you have these deranged leftists of all sort of, let's just say, persuasions and deviancies who think this is a call to war for some reason, for many
Hmm.
reasons. I shouldn't say for some
Hmm.
reason because I think we all know why this is, and that regardless of what one may have thought of the man or his views, I think, like I said, about 3 weeks on, I can safely say this country is a worse place for him having been killed, and that
Yep.
we have probably only seen the beginning in terms of political violence and, frankly, just random violence. Because the other killing that I think got in maybe some ways fairly, maybe other ways unfairly conflated with this was the killing in North Carolina that happened just a couple weeks before this of the Ukrainian refugee.
Yes. Yes.
And I don't want to relitigate that story too much because, like I said, I think everything that has been said about it, is
I'm
all
glad that
that's.
there was a vigil for that poor girl.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, this is where we live. Like, if you're not going to be slaughtered for your political views, you're going to be slaughtered because you had the misfortune of being in the presence of somebody who is a repeat offender who was probably on a cocktail of drugs who decided that you got to go. Like, that's that's what
Yeah.
we've come to, and uh,
And he repeatedly said, I got this white girl. I
yeah,
got
yeah,
this white
that's
girl."
that's what it
He, of
was.
course, hated white people, so obviously
Yeah,
he's going to kill her.
and you combine those kind of views with, let's just say, criminal tendencies for a number of reasons, plus what was likely a drug-induced stupor, and
Yep.
you get a very dangerous combination. And that combined with people who are not willing to enforce the law on this, and people are not willing to take these people, give them the death penalty if necessary, or lock them in a cage where they'll never see the light of day again. And I think both of these events happening back to back was very emblematic of both
Hmm.
American civil and political society, what you can come to expect.
Yeah. Yeah. Very well said. I think, in many ways, as time goes on, it won't really make a difference who killed Charlie Kirk. Um, will it galvanize support for Israel? I don't think so. I think it will probably, entrench the two different sides in America right now further, obviously. We shouldn't underestimate that, a lot of these, a lot of leftists are very radicalized already. During Trump's years, they enjoyed the peak of their moral hierarchy, and it blossomed in his last year of office with the death of George Floyd. Right? You saw a bit of this at the end of Obama's office, again, because of a black man killed by police, supposedly. I know the George Floyd thing is not quite the same thing because I don't believe he killed him. But in any case,
Yeah, but like the Ferguson and
Yes,
the
yes,
other riots of early BLM back in like 2014, 2015.
that's right. That's right. And so you saw this in 2020, and this went on for over 4 months. I mean, Portland and a few other cities were still dealing with protests and riots well into March. Sorry, October, and it
I mean,
started
the
right at the end
initial,
of May.
yeah, the initial event was at the end of May, and I mean, let's look at say the Rittenhouse case, which was another big thing to come out of this. That was at the end of August. That was 3 months later.
Yeah,
Rittenhouse had to defend himself against these violent protesters. And I mean, I can't believe, like, in my timeline of American political violence, I completely overlooked the BLM thing. I guess it's just become such a fixture where you don't even think about it anymore. But yeah, no, that's a great point, and that this is and another point I wanted to make on this, the last point I think I will make about this, when it comes to Thomas Crooks, the first Trump would-be assassin, and whatever I can't even remember the name of the guy who shot Kirk, but you know the let's just say F slur I'm thinking of.
yeah,
These were both men in their early 20s. It's like very early 20s. In which case, if you look at how old they would have been when Trump first got elected, they would have probably
yeah.
been just becoming teenagers. In which case, during their most formative years, when it comes to your mental development, they're hearing all these things probably about Trump is a fascist, Trump is a
And you know
yeah.
which side the school is on.
Oh yeah, yeah, and like I said, these people might have come from Republican families, but I mean, look, when you have to deal with media, social media, and the public school system, uh, odds are you're going to come out parroting the blue team line. So you had
Yep.
these people brought up with this, that this is an existential crisis. How could this happen? Trump, with the help of the evil Russians, stole the election. So, and then that, of course, when you take it to its logical conclusion, leads to this. And one of the big mouthpieces of the Trump administration, or at least the Trump base, Charlie Kirk. He must be terrible too. And if I can, stop fascism or whatever cope or whatever they've been brainwashed into, they can say the logical conclusion, especially when you get to a lot of these mentally unstable kids, who, mind you, also came of age around the time of the 2020 lockdowns, which I'm sure
Yes.
did all kinds of things to their mental state. I'm no psychologist or anything. I don't know how much about that, but like, I mean, if you talk to
That
kids
was
who
a
are around,
left-right divide as well.
yeah, yeah, that was it, absolutely. Uh, and
And so BLM protests did not endanger health. Every other protest did.
of course, if you wanted to,
That's what I mean about encouraging them, right? Like these people lived at the height of their moral superiority. They were, and in a way, Biden coming in changed nothing. There was a great, I think, disappointment with Biden, particularly amongst the young, particularly with the genocide in Gaza. And then what you have, Trump comes back into office. That gives some of these people new purpose, right? And these are young. They would have been 13, 14, 15 at the oldest, or around there, let's say. They would have been young teenagers during Trump's first term till, Biden is out. And so it's kind of like like Les Miserables. They think like they're going to refine the revolution, they're going to go back to the Bastille. Don't worry, everybody will come to our aid. And except nobody does. It's like uh the support isn't there because it's more of a one-time thing. And a lot of these people, I think, are frustrated because when Biden came in, there were attempts at disrupting ICE, and I remember one event, and in a way, they couldn't mobilize because Biden came in. So their mobilization is only needed when a Republican is in. And that's what I mean about them feeling there's a renewed purpose, but it's not like the first time. And that's why I bring up Les Miserables. Um, as a kind of a template in understanding why this was never going to work, but they don't know that, and so we'll probably see more political violence going on.
without question. And in terms of political violence, there's two other ones I want to bring up, and that is I touched on briefly. Ryan Ruth was convicted, awaiting sentencing for his attempted assassination of Trump in September 2024. And when the conviction came down, he tried to, of course, jab a pen into his neck. Now, he was prevented from doing
Oh
so, of
my
course.
God.
But Ryan Ruth, I mean, Thomas Crooks is the one who actually had the more substantial attempt against Trump that actually injured him and took out one other person at the Trump rally. But Ryan Ruth, when you look at his background, in my opinion, is a much more interesting figure in terms of somebody who would be an agent of political violence, given his ties to the NGOs, given his ties to Ukraine. I mean, you read his letter. I mean, you can't even call him insane because he did truly believe in what he was doing,
Yeah.
and like his writings were rational. It's just somebody who was so enthralled by this left wing ideology that, of course, the fight for freedom against fascism is on the front line of Ukraine. Even though I would never be accepted as a volunteer, I can still fundraise for them. I can still work for the NGOs. I can still help smuggle them weapons, etc., etc. And then that all culminates in the fact that Trump is the evil Putinist fascist who might undermine Ukraine. Funny now looking at that, I wonder if Trump and Ryan Ruth are on the same page about Ukraine these days. Who knows? Who knows? Yeah, like I said, a guy created pretty much. If George Soros had just like a factory that could create people, that it would be Ryan Ruth's all the way down. And
Yeah.
and you know what? I'm actually. This might be strange to say about somebody who committed such a or attempted to commit such a high profile crime. I seriously want to hear more from this guy. I want to hear everything he has to say. I want him to expose himself as the complete NGO shill that he is. And I think him being convicted around the same time Trump does his alleged 180 on Ukraine is one hell of a thing, considering the fact that Donald Trump was on the Miroshevitz list until November 2024.
Yes.
Which means he would have been on the list in September 2024 when Ryan Ruth attempted to take him out.
Yeah.
How about that? Yeah,
Yeah.
and mind you, going back further when it comes to Trump and Ukraine, I don't want to go on too much of a tangent here because there's another story about just general violence in the United States I wanted to cover in just a moment here. Trump was impeached the first time around for threatening to withhold funds from the country that had him on a hit list.
Yeah.
I think that's
that, huh?
that's the detail everyone forgets about the first Trump impeachment. Ukraine, the country that he threatened to withhold aid from, not that he ever would have, had him on a hit list. And that gets so easily forgotten these days. But the other case I wanted to cover is actually news from yesterday, and that is the Mormon church in Michigan that was attacked by a gunman who set the building on fire. I think at that point they're up to 4 dead and about a dozen wounded. Now, not much has come out about this guy yet, except the fact that he was a 40-year-old Iraq veteran, which means he probably was not mentally all there, probably was involved in some, let's just say, pretty nasty things. Now, whether you want to get into the question of war crimes, I don't know, but point being just a war zone, especially like Iraq in the mid-2000s, like I said, that's going to break a lot of people, and he probably was one of them. And like I said, we have no questions of motive or in terms of why he might have done it, whether he was a political radical, whether he was a militant atheist who saw fit to attack a religious institution, whether he was somebody who maybe was personally spurned by this particular Mormon church. I don't know. And as more details come out, I will update you on this story. Next time we do an episode, there's more to that. But that's also on top of that one deranged, let's just say, individual of uncertain gender persuasion that attacked the Catholic school at the end of last month. And going back even further from that, there was the one who attacked the explicitly Christian school of the same sort of gender persuasion. I think that was back in March 23, March of 24.
Yeah. Think of what Biden said after that one.
Oh yes, that was.
I believe that was a Was that a Presbyterian church?
Yes, it was.
It was Presbyterian, right? So that's mainline Protestant. He said that he literally said trans people are the fabric of America.
Yeah, I
The
remember that.
fabric of America. Of course, we all know Biden in 1905 when his dad, when he was a little wee thing,
19.
His dad took him for a walk in the park and he saw gay people necking. Of course, completely real. Completely real.
100%. We've CNN fact checked this.
I love, I do love how insane American politics is. It is funny. You can't deny it.
Yeah, I agree, and I participated in the humor of it all. But it looks like it's becoming a lot more deadly humor. That's the problem. And like I said,
Yes, yes. We should. Yeah,
yeah, no,
we can't make light of it. It's true.
no, I agree, and I do think that you have to approach these topics with some brevity, or else you will go insane. But this is, like I said, I'm sure the more I talk about this, the more examples I can think of. But in terms of political violence in particular, let alone just the issue of violent crime, it's going to continue. I think in the wake of the Kirk assassination, the Republicans have shown that they really have no will except, I don't know, maybe getting some school administrators fired, which, I mean, yeah, good riddance. Who cares, really? But in terms of actually solving the problem, it's not going to.
Yeah,
But I suppose we should move on to the UN, speaking of clown shows and mockeries.
sure.
And the big one is Donald Trump has declared war on escalators and teleprompters. But you know what? For every war he starts, he ends three. I alluded to this at the beginning of the show, but we
Yep.
can be very grateful that the Cambodia-Armenia war is over, that the Albania
That's why
Azerbaijan
this
war is over.
podcast is coming from peaceful.
Caucasian Albania.
Oh yes, yes, of course, of course.
Yeah, that's where you see. I was going to beforehand. We went from Serbia to Transnistria. I was gonna say we were in Abkhazia, but we were actually able to return to Caucasian Albania to do this show, which was the real reason for the delay. Okay, that's what they don't want you to know. But I'm getting off track. I'm getting so off track here, but I don't care. But with all that being said, Trump gave the a carbon copy of his UN speeches before. Globalism is over. You guys need to do something about immigration. Israel's our greatest ally. We're so tough against the Iranians. And he just spent an hour rambling about his normal points. I guess the more interesting speech came from Netanyahu, who was, of course, we have to win the war. Hamas bad. We need to destroy Iran. But the
Hamas bad.
the most stark thing about the Netanyahu speech is that it was practically an empty General Assembly. So few people actually stayed there. I remember.
Yes.
I think when I was listening to the speech, I will tell a personal anecdote. It was on a night after we had some company over, and I was just kind of catching up on stuff afterwards. And I was slightly inebriated, so I was watching the Netanyahu speech or clips of it, and I was shouting some expletives at the TV. I was shouting F slur in particular. For those of you who must know,
I wish I was there.
you know what?
Not joking.
We'll have to do that sometime. We will have to do
Yeah,
that sometime.
you should.
But it was all claptrap. It was all what you'd expect. But to tie it back to one of our earlier stories, this is where the Trump-Zelensky meeting took place, which was interesting because it was a short meeting. This is where you got a lot of the Trump paper tiger comments, and this is where you got, should European countries shoot down the Russian jets? Yes. Will you help them? No comment. Which was,
Yeah.
like I said, Trump, you can be frustrated with him. I am. A lot of the charm has gone away, but he has his moments. He certainly still has his moments.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was one of them. Well,
First year of Trump in his first term can never be replaced.
No,
and the lead up to his electoral victory was some of the funniest moments ever.
You're right. It can never be replaced. Trump's first term, I would say from 2017 to 2019, we really hit like that peak Trump there, but it's all been downhill since. But I do think this year, which was the 80th anniversary of the UN General Assembly, the 80th anniversary of the foundation of the UN, especially with the empty halls for both Netanyahu, which I understand, and Lavrov, because Putin didn't show up. He sent Lavrov in instead. which also he spoke to a mostly empty hall because Russian aggression or whatever. I do think this year, compared to even other years, did show that the UN really only exists as a formality. That nobody takes this organization seriously. Everyone gets up there, they say their piece, which is the same thing year after year, and nothing is really accomplished. They pass a multitude of resolutions that never have any fruits born from them, and it all just continues. The spotlight's always taken by whoever the American president is. Come to think of it, did Biden give any UN addresses? I don't recall if Biden spoke at. It wouldn't surprise me if he didn't, given the circumstances.
Hmm.
But I don't recall Biden speaking at the UN during his tenure. But I think this year, although I think everyone knew it, this year in particular starkly showed, and the reason I even bring up the UN General Assembly, this year starkly showed that this organization exists in name only, and that no matter what side of the issue you fall on, no matter where you are in the world, no matter what your political ideology is, nobody takes this body seriously. Not even the international law liberal types take this place seriously anymore. It's a complete joke, and uh, why does it still exist? Because it's anti-Israel is what they
Because
tell
the
us.
necessity of a UN has not died.
That is correct, and that's the
They wanted to succeed. They need it. They
yes,
want it. But again, it's because for anyone who gets to control the UN, and up until this point, it has been America.
yes.
It is the false neutral, the judge that says, well, this country was right, and if you happen to be the country where the UN is located, bully for you. but but it's not. In many ways, America had to begin not to take its legitimacy seriously, because after the fall of the Soviet Union, in many ways, America didn't see a need to take it seriously.
Well, of course not. And I'm glad you picked up on what I was putting down there because you continued that thread perfectly. I'm glad for that. I suppose 8 years of doing a show together will lead to those kind of moments. I don't know. You start to understand what the other one's saying. I'd hope so.
Yeah,
But
friends of mine even years ago would ask, "So do you guys rehearse?" I go, "No."
no.
Ooh, that's good. Wow, you guys are good.
Show prep, what's that?
Well,
Never
yeah,
heard of it. If not to go into too much personal anecdotes, but I remember when I first started the show, I'd spend like 3 hours and I would email you like a novel of notes.
yes, I
And
remember that.
yeah, and now we just do it. Now we just do it.
Yeah,
And we're better for it. Number one, and
I
I,
think
I
so.
I don't have a number two, but I suppose the last story we can really touch on before I just cover some. Actually, I'm gonna cover this minor piece of news first because it's ridiculous but also kind of funny, and then I'll get into the Trump Netanyahu summit with the so-called Gaza peace deal, and that is allegedly the Chinese are putting pressure on Trump to affirm the one China policy in favor of mainland China. That they are trying to get him to
Good luck.
walk back on the Taiwan issue. And I do hope that's true. And I don't expect it. I have no way of even coping that this might be the case. It would be one of the funniest things he ever did if he went along with it. If he reaffirmed one China. But
Yeah, Trump is a Chinese agent. I'm no longer a Russia agent. I'm now a Chinese agent.
look, we all have to be conscious of our social credit score, and I think Donald Trump is on top of that. Which I don't know. I've always found the friendly interpersonal relationship between Trump and Xi Jinping fascinating, but I don't think it's strong enough, especially at this point, to pull those strings. And yeah, let's get into the Gaza peace plan that was stated during Netanyahu's
Oh
White
yeah.
House visit this week. So, just some of the bullet points we have from that. Uh, Israel immediately agrees to a ceasefire and the withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. All Israeli captives released within 72 hours. amnesty for Hamas members who disarm and surrender, because as we all know, the PLO members who became the political wing of the West Bank, it worked out great for them. Arab peacekeepers deployed to Gaza. No role for Hamas governments. Trump also floats the idea of a so-called economic development plan. And then there were further details where a phone call. This was prearranged in a phone call between Netanyahu and Trump, where Trump made Israel apologize to Qatar, promising not to strike Qatar again. Because that was one of the other stories that, like I said, it's past, but
it is completely crazy when you think about it, right?
oh,
Because America's
absolutely,
diplomatic relations, Qatar supports Hamas. It's just like America buying enriched uranium from Russia. I mean, there is something absolutely wrong and bizarre about this.
yes, and of course, on top of that, Trump pledged to put Israel-Qatar relations back on a positive track, and I suppose we could deviate into the Qatar strikes because that did happen also in our absence, and I mean, who's shocked here? I'm not shocked.
Yeah.
Which I think it's funny. Qatar is hosting Hamas despite political pressure from Western countries to be the diplomatic representative of Hamas in talks with Israel. That gets overlooked. And then to get into the implications of the peace plan, it's just that they're going to say these things, and then they're going to say that the Hamas representatives didn't follow through, and it's going to be a return to business. But I do think there is some desire from Trump in order to get this bad optics off his hand. Not that I think he really cares too much about what's happening in Gaza, but rather how it makes him look and how it makes the United States look. So that it's just an anchor around our necks that he would prefer to have settled, even if it is kicking the can down the road, which I think has been his position since the campaign trail, really, since about March, April of 2024, at least explicitly. But the idea of Arab peacekeepers cracked me up, assuming like Saudi Arabia, the aforementioned
How is
Qatar,
this even real?
the Emiratis. I don't know. Maybe Jolani will send some HGS men to patrol the Gaza Strip. Maybe because he's all on board with the Abraham Accords. Oh yeah, not to backtrack too much. He had his moment in the sun at the UN. That's quite the promotion. And there was actually a picture of him meeting with one of the U.S. military officials who actually was in charge of the prison camp he was in during the Iraq War, and they were shaking hands at the UN. So that was a nice picture. We all love Jelani. No, I'm not even gonna say that jokingly. We all hate Jelani, and he's a bastard in every conceivable
He is a
way.
bastard. He's an evil person.
Yes, and
And the Americans, the Jews, all of them, the Europeans, the Brits, they all empower this piece of shit.
yeah, and the duplicity about making like bringing attention to the massacres that him and his regime have committed less than 2 weeks after Israeli officials are shaking hands with them. It's like, why do you care about Gaza? Look at what Jelani's doing in Syria. Well, gee, I wonder how he got there. Like, I wonder if Jelani is in diplomatic talks with the Israelis and thinking about signing the Abraham Accords. No, Tel Aviv, this is your guy, okay? Don't deflect on him.
Yeah.
You guys are one and the same. But with the obligatory Jelani hate out of the way, going back to the Gaza peace plan, it is interesting throughout all of this because Trump has to play coy with the Gulf state Arabs and to a lesser extent countries like Egypt, because there are some American interests there, and he also has to keep them on at least decent terms with the Israelis. So when it comes to the Gaza issue, when it comes to the Hamas issue, while I'm sure there are hardliners in the administration, while Trump himself might want to say, do whatever you want, Israel, and at times he actually has said that, take the whole Gaza Strip, take the West Bank, we won't care. That was also one of the pledges there, that Israel will stop annexations in the West Bank. They won't reverse any of them, but they'll stop what they've done. I guess that's good enough. But Trump has to play coy with these Arab countries because there's a lot of money tied up from there in America and vice versa. and also he has an interest in keeping these countries at least on a cooperative basis with Israel because that's one less flank that we have to defend. So the idea of Arab peacekeepers, especially in light of recent events, it's a joke. It's a meaningless gesture to try to appeal to them. And frankly, given the what one could call a betrayal of the people of Gaza by these Arab states, I wouldn't be surprised if Hamas expand their military operations against them. Maybe not, but given how these countries have time again chosen cooperation with Israel behind closed doors, I don't think Hamas has any reason to uh, really have any sympathy for these countries or their so-called peacekeepers, and that it would probably just inflame the situation to have these people. I'm sure
Mhm.
the narrative spinners on the Palestinian side would have a field day saying that, well, look, these are open Zionist, especially ones of a more pro-Iranian bend would have a field day saying the Saudis, the Emiratis, they're all Zionist collaborators, and I know that there's some breakthrough diplomatically between Saudi Arabia and Iran, thanks mostly to Chinese diplomatic efforts. However, those issues are not entirely resolved. And now that Trump's back in the White House, the Gulf states are in a little bit more of a precarious situation when it comes to that. But it's a ridiculous proposal. But I think it's at the same time the most interesting proposal that's brought up here. Because in many ways,
It-
if it were to somehow go through, it would be a formalization of everything everyone already knew.
hmm.
But that's really the only point I had on the Hamas peace plan. The Israel Hamas peace plan. I don't know if you have any points to add to that.
Well, I mean, we've seen for years now, whether we're talking about Ukraine or somewhere in the Middle East, basically plans, proposals that we know are destined to fail. Like the point is to create a proposal that you know will be rejected, right? But to look like you're doing something. So,
Yes, as always. I don't know if you had any last minute stories you wanted to bring up.
no, I think the last program that we did, I did correct that, I'd gotten an article with Le Monde mixed up with an article by the New York Times about mass killing of civilians by Ukrainians in the Kursk region. So no, I don't really. Yeah, that's about it for me.
Well, thank you everyone for bearing with us through some of these scheduling hiccups. We're glad to be back, and hopefully we'll be able to keep things up on a more consistent basis. With plenty more to cover, I'll try to follow up on as many of these open-ended stories as I can, and we'll see you guys next time. And goodbye.
Goodbye and take care.